The quality, the preservation is three-dimensional. The thing isn't crushed. And then it's an animal that comes from a time period much older than when we normally find dinosaurs in Alberta.
Before you assume this is just another dinosaur story, wait until you hear what scientists found inside this perfectly preserved prehistoric giant. Even the experts couldn't believe it. What survived for millions of years challenged everything they expected to find, and turned this fossil into one of the most astonishing discoveries ever made. The deeper researchers looked, the more unbelievable the evidence became, revealing secrets that had remained hidden since the age of the dinosaurs.
After 6 years of painstaking work, the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, Alberta, unveils its rare and astonishing discovery. It appears to be an 18-foot-long nodosaur, a type of armored dinosaur.
The body that refused to rot. Let me start with something that happened only recently, because it shows just how strange and exciting the world of prehistoric discoveries has become. In the state of Queensland, a team of researchers uncovered a marine reptile unlike anything they had seen before. At first, it looked like another valuable fossil, but within moments, they realized they were staring at something incredibly rare. This animal had survived the passage of time in a way that almost never happens. The reason had nothing to do with its size or even its age. It was the head that changed everything. In nearly every similar fossil ever discovered, the skull had broken away from the neck long before scientists found it. Millions of years of pressure, shifting rock, and natural erosion usually separate these fragile bones from the rest of the skeleton. By the time paleontologists uncover the remains, the most important part is often gone forever. This time was different. The skull was still attached to the neck exactly where it belonged. Stretching more than 4 meters, the neck remained connected to the body almost perfectly. The discovery was so extraordinary that the researchers affectionately nicknamed the animal the Little Prince. It instantly became one of the finest preserved specimens of its kind ever found. Despite appearing in countless dinosaur documentaries and books, this creature was not actually a dinosaur. It was an elasmosaur, a long-necked marine reptile that shared the oceans with dinosaurs but belonged to an entirely different evolutionary group. Scientists make this distinction very carefully because each group tells a different chapter of Earth's history, and mixing them together hides what makes each one unique. When Espen Knutsen spoke about the discovery, his excitement was impossible to miss. He explained that finding a specimen with both the skull and body still connected was like winning the lottery. The skull contains some of the most valuable scientific information imaginable. It reveals how the animal hunted, what it ate, how powerful its bite was, how it sensed its surroundings, and even clues about its behavior. Without the head, much of that story disappears forever. That discovery also revealed something much bigger. The fossils scientists treasure most are rarely the largest or the oldest. Instead, they are the rare individuals who somehow escaped nature's relentless destruction. Normally, bacteria, scavengers, flowing water, shifting sediment, and millions of years of geological pressure erase almost every trace of an animal long before humans ever have a chance to find it. Complete skeletons are extraordinarily uncommon because everything about nature works against their survival. Yet every so often, the impossible happens. An animal dies under exactly the right conditions, becomes buried almost immediately, and is sealed away before time can destroy it. Those fossils become priceless windows into worlds that disappeared tens of millions of years ago. As astonishing as the Little Prince truly was, it was only a preview of something even more unbelievable. Years earlier, thousands of miles away, a man operating a massive mining machine accidentally drove his steel bucket into something hidden deep beneath the earth. What he uncovered would leave paleontologists speechless, challenge decades of scientific assumptions, and reveal one of the most perfectly preserved prehistoric animals ever discovered. Inside that remarkable fossil waited secrets that no one believed could possibly survive for millions of years. A discovery nobody was looking for. Travel with me to the far north of Alberta, Canada, to a bleak stretch of land soaked through with bitumen and stripped completely bare for the oil buried beneath it. This is one of the harshest industrial sites on the entire continent, an open mine run by the Suncor Company, where enormous mechanical shovels tear through the ground day and night to reach the black oil sands underneath. There is nothing gentle or beautiful about this place. Nobody comes here hoping to touch history. They come here to move Earth, to make money, and to keep the machines fed and running around the clock. On a spring afternoon in the year 2011, a heavy equipment operator named Sean Funk was doing exactly what he came to do. He was carving into a wall of packed earth, no different from any other shift he had ever worked, when the resistance beneath his bucket suddenly changed character. It was not the soft, familiar give of clay, and it was not the loose crumble of ordinary dirt. It was something hard and strange, and pieces of it broke loose in odd, walnut-brown lumps that tumbled down the wall in front of him. Funk stopped the machine and climbed out to look. His supervisor came over as well, and neither of these men could make the slightest sense of what they were staring at. The strange fragments had a distinct texture to them, almost like rows of tiles, almost like the surface of something that had once been living and breathing. Neither of them had any way of knowing it in that moment, but Funk had just punched his bucket clean through the shoulder of an animal that had died 110 million years before he was born. This was not a scattering of loose bones waiting to be sifted from the dirt. This was a body. From the very tip of its snout all the way back to its hips, the entire front half of a fully armored dinosaur sat locked inside the stone, its skin intact, its heavy armor plates still bolted into position across its back, even the hard sheaths that once capped its spikes still sitting exactly where they belonged. This was the kind of thing paleontologists lie awake dreaming about and almost never get to see. The vast majority of them will pour an entire career into the field and never once lay eyes on anything even close to it. Getting the thing out of the ground became a slow-motion nightmare all its own. The block of rock cradling the creature weighed several tons, and the crew was forced to work with an almost painful slowness so they would not shatter the priceless fossil buried inside. At one point, the enormous block cracked and broke apart under its own crushing weight, and the team had to carefully gather every piece and reassemble the whole thing like the heaviest and most nerve-wracking puzzle in the world. The full extraction stretched across the better part of 2 weeks. When the crew finally lifted it free and shipped it south to the Royal Tyrrell Museum, every person involved understood that the truly difficult work had not even begun. What waited inside that slab of stone would demand years from a single man's life to bring into the light, and by the time he was finished, the animal he uncovered would look less like a fossil and more like a creature that had simply lain down and died a week earlier. 7,000 hours in the dark. There is one person threaded through this whole story whose patience I honestly cannot fully wrap my head around, and his name is Mark Mitchell. Mitchell worked as a technician at the museum, one of those quiet, meticulous specialists who spend their careers behind the scenes doing the invisible work that the public never sees and rarely thinks about. When that massive stone block arrived carrying its armored passenger, the responsibility of freeing the animal from its rocky prison landed squarely on his shoulders. And so, he sat down with it, and in a very real sense, he did not get back up for years. The rock encasing the animal was, in many places, harder than the fossilized remains themselves, which meant that a single careless move, one slip of a tool at the wrong angle, could destroy skin that had somehow endured for over 100 million years. Mitchell could not afford to rush a single stroke. He worked grain by grain and flake by flake, chipping away the surrounding stone in impossibly tiny increments, while leaving the fragile remains completely untouched. Across roughly 5 years of steady labor, he poured more than 7,000 hours into this one single specimen. That figure is not a typo, and it is not some dramatic exaggeration invented for a video. 7,000 hours of careful, silent, back-breaking concentration, every last minute of it aimed at one animal that had been waiting patiently for him since the age of the early Cretaceous. The scientists working at the museum were so deeply moved by what this man had accomplished that they made a decision that is almost unheard of in their profession. When the moment came to give this brand new species its formal scientific name, they chose to build his name directly into it for all of history to see. They named the animal Borealopelta markmitchelli, a name that carries the meaning of Mark Mitchell's Northern Shield. It is a rare and genuinely moving kind of tribute, the sort of honor that will outlive every person who was in the room when it was decided. Long after all of us watching this have turned to dust, that man's name will still sit permanently attached to one of the finest fossils ever pulled from the ground anywhere on Earth. And everything Mitchell so carefully uncovered turned out to be worth every second he sacrificed. This was not some flattened, crushed impression pressed thin into shale like nearly every fossil you have ever seen in a school textbook. This was a full, three-dimensional animal, a body with real depth and real shape and real presence, so uncannily lifelike that the researchers gathering around it kept describing it in the same stunned and almost disbelieving language. Dr. Caleb Brown, one of the lead scientists studying the creature, explained that the more complete and well-preserved a fossil happens to be, the more information science can pull from it, and this specimen was about as complete as anything they had ever handled. But the very moment the team leaned in close to study the surface of that ancient skin, they discovered something painted onto the body of this animal that no researcher had ever managed to prove on any dinosaur in the history of science. The color of a ghost. For as long as human beings have studied these animals, the true color of a dinosaur has been nothing but educated guesswork. Every painting hanging in every gallery, every model standing in every museum hall, every towering monster you have ever watched stomp across a movie screen was somebody's best guess and nothing more. The green scales, the gray hides, the muddy brown skin, all of it was chosen because an artist felt it looked correct, never because a single person actually knew. The skin was always the very first part of the body to rot away into nothing, and when it went, it carried off with it any hope of ever knowing what these creatures genuinely looked like when they were alive. So when the team first sat down to analyze Borealopelta, not one of them expected real color to even be a possibility worth discussing. Then, the chemistry sitting inside the scales began telling a completely different story. Preserved within the skin of this animal were the faint molecular remains of pigment, the actual chemical fingerprints of the exact color this creature had worn while it was alive and walking. Working closely with Dr. Jakob Winther from the University of Bristol, a scientist who has built his reputation on decoding the colors of long-dead animals, the team found powerful evidence that Borealopelta had been a reddish-brown creature in life. After 110 million years of silence, these researchers had reached back across an impossible gulf of time and recovered the true living shade of a dinosaur's skin. That single achievement alone would have been more than enough to send this discovery racing across headlines all over the planet. But the pattern woven into that color is where the whole thing turns genuinely unsettling. The animal was noticeably darker along the top of its back and considerably lighter underneath its belly, an arrangement that scientists refer to as counter-shading. You can walk outside today and see this precise pattern on deer, on countless species of fish, and on a huge number of prey animals that spend their lives desperately trying to avoid being eaten. It is a natural and time-tested form of camouflage, a clever trick of shading that flattens out the appearance of a body so that a predator staring down from above struggles to separate the animal from the ground beneath it. And that discovery raised a deeply strange and slightly disturbing question about this specific beast. Because Borealopelta was in no way some helpless little mouthful of a creature. This animal was a walking fortress in every sense of the word. It stretched somewhere around 18 feet in length, tipped the scales at close to 3,000 pounds, and wore a thick coat of bony armor bristling with spikes, including 2 enormous blades of keratin thrusting outward from its shoulders. An animal constructed like a living tank should logically have nothing whatsoever to fear from anything sharing its landscape. And yet, against all of that, its own body had been dressed in the unmistakable camouflage of the hunted. That single fact means that somewhere out there in its ancient world roamed a predator so overwhelmingly powerful and so terrifying that even this armored giant needed to hide from it to survive. The scientists had finally found the animal itself. Now they went hunting for whatever could possibly have frightened a 3,000-pound tank, and the first real clue to that answer was still sitting quietly inside the dinosaur's own stomach. What was still inside? This is the exact point where the story crosses over into territory that honestly sends a chill down my spine every single time, because nearly everything I have described to you so far concerns the outside of the animal. The skin, the armor, the color. But when the researchers finally turned their full attention to the belly of this beast, they discovered that the miraculous preservation had reached all the way through to the inside. Sitting inside the gut cavity, right in the place where its stomach would have rested, was a dense, fossilized mass of material. This was the animal's final meal, still lodged in position after 110 million years of waiting in the dark. Allow that fact to settle over you for a real moment. We are not discussing a footprint pressed into old mud or a scattering of bleached bones. We are discussing the actual food this creature swallowed on the very last day of its life, preserved so thoroughly and so completely that scientists were able to slice the mass into thin sections, slide them beneath a microscope, and read the contents like the pages of a private diary. Dr. Brown and his colleagues published their findings on this stomach, and the level of intimate detail they recovered was almost hard to believe. The stomach was packed overwhelmingly full of plant matter, and the animal had clearly been remarkably picky about what it chose to eat. It was consuming ferns, and specifically the soft, tender, leafy tips of ferns, while deliberately ignoring most of the other vegetation growing thick all around it. This was not some mindless machine chewing through whatever crossed its path. This was a selective, discerning eater with clear preferences and habits, an animal that suddenly starts to feel like it had something close to a personality. And then the team found the charcoal, and everything changed again. Mixed carefully throughout that ancient stomach were burnt fragments, tiny blackened pieces of charred plant material that told a story no dry bone could ever hope to tell. The presence of that charcoal strongly suggests this dinosaur had been feeding across a landscape that was slowly recovering from a wildfire, wandering patiently through the fresh green shoots that always push up out of scorched and blackened ground in the months after a burn tears through a forest. The researchers were even able to narrow down the timing of its death with startling precision, estimating that the animal took its final breath somewhere in the window of late spring into the middle of summer. We are talking about a single meal, eaten on a single afternoon, during one specific season of one specific year, taken from the body of an animal that has been dead since a time before the very first flowers had learned to bloom across this planet. That is not paleontology as most people quietly imagine it to be. That is something much closer to genuine time travel. I keep finding my mind drawn back to that scene again and again. This heavily armored giant browsing quietly and contentedly through a burned-out stretch of forest, delicately picking at the softest ferns, completely unaware that its life was about to end, and that its body was about to become one of the single most valuable scientific objects on the face of the earth. Because none of what we now know, not the color, and not the meal, and not the perfect skin, would have ever been possible without an incredibly specific and frankly violent chain of events that unfolded in the exact moment this creature died. And that grim sequence of events is a kind of dark miracle standing entirely on its own. The perfect storm of death. To truly understand how a soft-bodied animal manages to survive well over 100 million years without simply rotting away into absolutely nothing, you first have to accept that nearly everything had to go exactly right, or perhaps more accurately, exactly wrong, in one very particular and unforgiving order. When the overwhelming majority of creatures die, their bodies are ripped apart within a matter of days. Scavengers arrive and tear them open. Colonies of bacteria bloom and spread through the soft tissue, and oxygen patiently breaks everything down until only the hardest bones are left behind. And often, not even those manage to survive the ordeal. For skin and armor and stomach contents to make it through intact, the entire normal machinery of decay had to be shut down and suspended. The scientists carefully pieced together the most likely version of what happened. and it reads almost like a strange and unlucky sequence of misfortunes. Borealopelta most probably died somewhere on dry land, close to the banks of a river, and its lifeless body was then swept downstream and carried out into the vast inland sea that once cut North America completely in half. As the carcass drifted along on the current, the gases produced by decomposition swelled and bloated inside the body and kept it floating on the surface for a stretch of time, bobbing across the open water in what the researchers describe as a bloat and float phase. But that fragile buoyancy could never last for long. Eventually, the swollen body gave way, rolled over onto its back, and began to sink, plunging slowly down through the water toward the distant seafloor far below. And the bottom of that ancient sea is precisely where the real magic quietly took hold. The seabed down there was an environment almost completely starved of oxygen, a silent dead zone where the very bacteria that normally rush in to devour flesh simply could not survive or thrive. The instant that the armored back settled into the soft mud, the relentless countdown of decay slowed to an absolute crawl. Fine sediment quickly moved in and buried the body, sealing it away from scavengers and shifting currents alike. Then, across truly unimaginable spans of time, minerals began slowly seeping into the tissues, hardening around every individual scale and every subtle fold of skin, patiently replacing the organic material molecule by molecule while faithfully preserving the exact shape of everything. The animal was not merely fossilized in the ordinary sense. It was entombed inside a natural sarcophagus of stone that captured its entire body in 3 full dimensions, a mineral cast so astonishingly faithful that it locked away details we had all assumed were lost to science forever. It took a rapid burial, a low-oxygen grave, and a slow, patient flood of minerals, all working together in flawless sequence to freeze this creature in time. Alter even one single step in that chain, and the animal disappears completely, exactly like all the countless others that came before it. That is why specimens like this one are treated as almost mythical objects within the field, and why the researchers who handle them speak about them in careful, almost reverent tones. But here is the one thought that keeps quietly nagging at every one of us who follows this science closely and refuses to let go. If the tissue itself can survive all of this, if the skin and the stomach can endure across such a staggering distance of time, then people inevitably begin asking a far larger and far more dangerous question about what else might still be hiding, waiting, and intact, deep inside these ancient bodies. The dream that science keeps killing. You already know exactly where this is heading, because every single mind travels to the same forbidden place. If we can somehow recover the true color and the final meal of a dinosaur, then surely, somewhere buried in there, we ought to be able to find the ultimate prize. We ought to be able to find the DNA. We ought to be able to do precisely what a certain very famous film promised an entire generation of us, and bring these magnificent animals roaring back into a living world. It is easily one of the most seductive ideas in all of modern science, and believe me, I would love nothing more than to tell you it is waiting just around the next corner. The honest truth is a great deal more sobering than that, and it is genuinely worth understanding exactly why the door stays shut. The complication truly began with the pioneering work of a researcher named Mary Schweitzer, who absolutely stunned the entire scientific community when she reported finding what appeared to be soft, flexible, stretchy tissue and traces of proteins such as collagen preserved inside dinosaur bone. Her findings were fiercely and bitterly debated at the time, and they remain genuinely controversial to this very day. But they cracked open a door that nearly everyone had confidently assumed was welded shut forever. Suddenly, the radical idea that molecular traces of these animals could actually persist across such deep stretches of time was on the table for serious discussion. And some researchers have even claimed to spot faint hints of tiny structures that resemble the shriveled remnants of ancient cells. This single line of research is the true source of all those breathless, excited headlines you constantly see promising that dinosaur DNA is now just one small technicality away from reality. But DNA is an achingly fragile thing, vastly more fragile and delicate than the sturdy proteins that occasionally manage to survive the ages. Scientists who carefully studied the natural decay of genetic material calculated that DNA carries a half-life of only around 521 years, which means that half of all its molecular bonds break apart within that span, then half of whatever remains breaks apart in the next stretch, and so the pattern continues relentlessly. Run that brutal mathematics forward across the ages, and the genetic code becomes completely and hopelessly unreadable long before you ever come anywhere close to the era of the dinosaurs. The molecules simply cannot cling together across 66 million years and more. So the reddish-brown giant that once browsed through its burned-out forest is going to stay exactly where it is right now. We can gaze at it, we can study its skin and its final meal and its last living season, but we can never truly rebuild it. And whatever finally erased these animals from the face of this planet, an event of almost incomprehensible fire and violence, made absolutely certain that the world they ruled for well over 150 million years would never come back in any living form. Borealopelta does not stand alone in all of this, and honestly, that is what makes this specific moment in science so genuinely thrilling to live through. Deep in the Badlands of North Dakota, there rests a mummified duck-billed dinosaur that researchers affectionately nicknamed Dakota, a creature preserved in full 3 dimensions with its fossilized skin still wrapped around its body. In the rugged hills of Italy, a tiny baby predator called Scipionyx was uncovered, carrying the mineralized traces of its own intestines, its liver, and even its muscles, still faintly visible inside its small frame. Over in Montana, a hadrosaur nicknamed Leonardo turned up with much of its body still coated in preserved skin and soft tissue. Each of these discoveries is a window that we had all assumed could never possibly exist, a rare chance to study not merely the dry bones of these animals, but the actual living substance of them. We are genuinely living through a quiet revolution, a great shift away from an age of studying bare skeletons and into a bold new age of studying the true flesh of the prehistoric world itself. For well over 100 million years, this armored giant lay hidden in total and absolute darkness, sealed away inside solid stone, silently guarding the true color of its skin and the faithful memory of its very last meal, patiently waiting for a working man in a mining machine to accidentally set it free from its grave. Its discovery, along with the others like it, took ancient creatures that had only ever existed as cold concepts assembled from scattered bone and quietly turned them back into real, breathing animals that once walked and ate and hid from terrifying things lurking in the dark. Does a discovery like this one make the lost world of the dinosaurs feel closer and more real to you? Or does it somehow make that world feel even more haunting and impossibly far away? Drop your most honest thoughts in the comments down below, because I read through every single one of them, and I truly want to know where your mind wanders after sitting with a story like this.